Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys a cool slider that while scrolling through the GSAP community, I found out and it looked really nice. So you might have seen sliders like these in many of the websites, wherein when you keep clicking on the images, the front one basically hides, and then we have this cool loop wherein the image basically keeps getting added up at the very bottom, and then when you keep clicking they just keep coming through and it looks really nice, really sleek. So we're going to be building this using GSAP and GSAP Flip plugin. So it's a really nice tutorial if you want to learn the advanced plugins of GSAP and want to add cool animations like these in your website. So without a delay, let's get started and let's learn to build this. Now, before starting the video, the source code of this is down in the description, so you guys can download and play with that. And also in my description, I have the link to my UI library, which I released recently, which has cool components for your React and Next.js projects. So you guys can explore and let me know in the comments which component you like the best. And yes, hopefully in the next week or so, I'll be also adding this component as your React and Next.js version, just so that you can use it in your React Next.js projects as well. So yeah, without a delay, let's get started and let's learn to build this. Alright, so here I'm in my browser and I have the HTML and CSS of the slider getting rendered here. Now let me open up and basically walk you through what I have here. So the code isn't too crazy. So in the HTML, I have a slider div wherein I have 5 images with the class of item. And then as for the CSS, the slider is basically positioned relative, since the element inside would be placed absolutely, just so that we can have this stacking effect. We add a bit of transform just so that we can place it sort of at the center and not, I won't say this is 100% the center, but then yeah, this is sort of at the center. And then for each of the individual item, as I've said, they have position absolute width as 300 pixels. Some image properties like object fit, object position, background transparent, we don't really need, you can remove it. And then a border of 1 pixel, and this is the color. Since the image, some of the images are white and sort of blends with the background, so I wanted to throw in a border, just so that we can distinguish between the border, image and the background. So that's basically what we have for the image. And then as for the stacking one, we target each of the individual images or the items using the nth child, and then we just add some specific styling to them. All right, now the important stuff to note here is the first element, that is this, is not the first element that is rendered at the very front. So the front image is basically the bottommost. Now you may say why this is so. The reason for that is because we're having position as absolute. So if we have position absolute on the first one, second one, third one, so now they keep stacking up, and then the one at the very bottom basically comes at the top. So the very front image, the very top or the first image here is not the front image. This is basically the bottom one. So now if I inspect and I show you, if I hover this, you see that this is the last one. And then right underneath that is the fourth, third, second, and first. So this you need to know, else you might get confused when we start with the JavaScript. Now to animate it, as I've said, we're going to be using GSAP. So here first, let's add the CDN for GSAP and the Flip plugin, and let's start adding our JavaScript. First, we grab another slider and also each of the individual items, and using the GSAP's utils, we store them in an array. Then we make the most important function, that is when you click on the front image gets added onto the very back. So let's call it move card. And what we do is we grab onto the last item. Since this front image is basically the last image in our HTML div, let's call it last item, and we grab it using query selector and then have item last child. And then we check if the slider and the last item exist. Now obviously, since you're using this component, obviously they would exist. So what we want to do is first we hide the very front image using display none. Then what we do is we make a clone of this. Since this is an image element, so we'll create an image. We add the same class name as the last item, same source as that, and then we just insert this cloned image at the very front here. So we just have slider.insert before new item, and this comes right before the slider's first child. And when I save, when I click, nothing actually happens because we're still not using this move card function. So the main logic of the animation is done. We just have to now animate it. So this move card, when clicked, basically hides your first front image, makes a clone of it, and then just pushes it at the very bottom. Now, to use animation, we'll be using GSAP's Flip plugin. So first, we want to have a click event. So we target the slider and add an event listener of click, and then we grab onto the state. Now, the way Flip plugin works, it basically takes a screenshot and stores it as a state. And anytime you modify the state, you can play with the animations. So this state is basically a snapshot of all the different items that you have. Let's console and let's see what we have here. Now, let's refresh. Let's open up the DevTools, and when I click on any of the images, you see that we get this object. Now, this object has a bunch of stuff. The one that we need to understand is this targets. As you can see in the targets, we have 5 elements starting with the index of 0. The front one, or the first image, is basically the last one. And then the one at the very front is the last one here. Make sense? Hopefully. So now what we want to do is anytime we click this, we want to basically fire off this move card. Let's save, let's refresh, and when I click on here, as you can see that the element got added at the very bottom, and then the next one basically got rendered. Now if I keep clicking on the images, only the first one keeps getting added. And now as you can see, the array has now 22 elements. If I were to inspect, as you can see, only the first or the front image, or basically the last image, which is this, kept getting added at the very front of the slider, which we don't really want. The reason for that is when we click on the front one, it gets added, but it's never actually removed. So what we have to do is, first, let's add a bit of animation of when this gets added at the very behind. So we grab onto the state, we target the item, we add an ease, and whenever the state changes or whenever there is a new element entering the state, basically the cloned one, what we want to do is we want to fire off a GSAP from animation, which basically means how your element was before it got added onto the DOM. So here what we have is we want it to basically fade in from the bottom. So we have Y% as 20. Opacity initially would be 0, but then when it actually gets added, it would have the opacity of 1. And then this ease. Let's save, and now let's refresh, and when I click on the front image, as you can see, it got added with this smooth animation. Now whenever you're adding, or whenever you basically click on the first one, you also want to hide the first one. But since what's happening now is, since you're only adding display none, you can't really add any animation to the element, since obviously the element is not getting displayed. So how would you animate? So since the element is out of the flow, to add any animation to it, we need to grab onto the element and actually use it. So we need this absolute property as true. And then this would enable us to grab onto the elements that are also not displayed, and we can add animations to those as well. So whenever the element gets away or out of the flow, what we want to do is we want to add a to animation to the element. What we want to do is we want to basically move it a bit down and also towards a bit left. So we have Y% and X%. Transform origin as bottom left, opacity, we want to hide it, so we have opacity as 0 and ease as expo out. Now when I save, when I click on the first one, as you can see, the element basically animates and gets hidden. And when I keep adding or keep clicking, the same element keeps getting added behind. Now what we have to do is, even though we're adding display none, we're not actually removing the element. The element is still there in the DOM. So when this animation ends on complete, we grab onto the slider, we call this remove child, and remove the very first element. Now this element 0th index is basically this one, right? So whenever you add, so this 0th index element would be the one that is at the very bottom. Let's save. And now as I keep clicking, the first one hides itself, it gets deleted, the clone one gets added behind, and we see that smooth, infinite kind of looped animation. So this is it for this video. Hope this was fun. The source code would be down in the description, and I'll soon be making a component of this and we'll be deploying in my UI library. Now if you guys haven't checked out my UI library, it's a brand new one. It's for React and Next.js. I'll be adding the link down in the description. So yeah, I'll be soon adding this in my library so that you guys can use it in your React and Next.js project. Do comment down if you like this video. Make sure you basically share it with your friends and family who are into web development and building cool stuff like these. I make cool stuff like these every week, so if you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure to subscribe. That's it for this video. Meet you guys in the next. Till then, bye bye, take care, and peace.